My name is Claire Whitmore, and I was 29 the year my father's hands stopped working. Not all at once. That's not how Parkinson's takes a man. It starts with a coffee cup shaking on the table, a signature that no longer looks like itself, a wrench dropped in the middle of a job he's done 10,000 times. Then one morning he looks at the lathe he's operated since 1987, and he can't remember the sequence. He stands in the doorway of his workshop, and he just stands there. I drove 4 hours to Harnett County on a Thursday in November to find him sitting on an overturned bucket outside the workshop door. He was wearing his gray canvas work apron. He still had grease under his fingernails. He was watching the trees. He didn't ask me how the drive was. He said, "Claire, I think I need to tell you something before your brother gets here." My brother got there 2 days later. What happened in the week after that cost my family more than money. It cost the thing families spend years pretending they have. Welcome to her silent triumph, a channel for women who watched someone they loved get handled like a transaction and refused to let it stand. If you have ever sat across a table from your own family and realized the meeting wasn't actually about what they said it was about, drop a comment below. You are exactly where you should be. And please subscribe. The quietest stories land the hardest, and I post a new one every week. Let me tell you who my father is before I tell you what my brother tried to do. His name is Raymond Whitmore. He grew up in a mill town outside Fayetteville, North Carolina, the second of 4 boys, in a house with 1 bathroom and no insulation in the walls. He learned to fix things because broken things were the only things his family had. He learned to fix them well because in that house, well was the only acceptable standard. He opened Whitmore Precision Machining in 1989, the same year I was born. The shop sat on 2 acres off Route 87, a single-story cinder block building with a corrugated metal roof, and a parking lot that had more gravel patches than original asphalt. Inside, 3 lathes, a milling machine, a surface grinder he'd saved 4 years to buy, and a workbench his own father had built from heart pine salvaged from a demolished tobacco barn. That workbench was the first thing I ever sat on. My mother has a photograph of it. I'm maybe 8 months old, propped against Raymond's left arm, both of us looking at a gear he's turning in his right hand. He is explaining something to me that I am absolutely too young to understand, and my face is completely serious, as if I am following every word. That was always the nature of our relationship. He talked to me about the business the way some fathers talk to sons. Not because my brother Marcus wasn't capable. Marcus is smart, quick, charming, the kind of man who sells himself before he sells anything else. It was because Marcus was never interested. Marcus wanted the version of things that skipped the middle. He wanted the outcome without the accumulation. He liked money the way some people like weather, as something that arrived from somewhere else and did things to your life. I became a contracts paralegal at 24. Property transactions, title searches, estate work. The kind of job where you read the same paragraph 7 times and find the sentence that undoes everything. My father would call me at 9 at night and ask me to read over lease agreements for shop equipment. I'd walk him through indemnification clauses while he stood at the kitchen counter in his work apron, eating dinner late because he'd stayed until 8. Marcus called once every few months, usually when he needed something. The Parkinson's diagnosis came in March of the year I turned 28. Stage 2. The neurologist in Raleigh used phrases like manageable progression and occupational adjustments. My father wrote the important parts in a small spiral notebook he kept in his breast pocket. He'd been keeping those notebooks his whole life. Parts numbers, supplier contacts, measurements. Now, medication times, appointment dates, the name of an attorney he wanted to call. He called the attorney in April. He didn't tell Marcus. He told me in June, when I came down for his birthday. We sat on the back steps with sweet tea, and he said, "I went and saw Earl Totham over on Broad Street. Got some things in writing. Wanted to do it while I'm still sharp enough to know what sharp feels like." I asked what things. He said, "The shop, the property, what happens to them?" He looked out at the field behind the house. The workshop light was on. It was always on. "Marcus is going to have ideas," he said. I wanted to make sure the right idea was already on paper before he got here with his. I didn't ask more than that. Some things you understand without needing the full sentence. My father's health held through summer and into fall. Good months and harder months, the way the disease works. He was still doing finish work, the precise jobs that required patience more than strength, the jobs that computers and younger men hadn't taken yet. His customers were loyal in the way people are loyal to a craftsman who has never once delivered something wrong. Marcus visited in September. He drove up from Wilmington in a silver pickup truck that still had the dealer sticker in the back window. He stayed 2 nights. He and my father ate dinner, watched football, talked about things I wasn't there for. I heard about the visit from my mother, Sandra. She called me on a Sunday. She has a specific voice she uses when she's passing information she doesn't want to hold alone. Careful, measured, like she's reading from a form. Marcus thinks your father should consider some options for the property, she said. I asked what options. He found a buyer, a company, some kind of industrial services group out of Charlotte. She paused. He says they'd pay well, that it would give your father and me something to live on without the shop having to keep running. I asked if she and Dad had discussed this. Your father said he'd think about it. Another pause. He said it very quietly. I know what my father sounds like when he's buying time. I know what he sounds like when he's been cornered by someone he loves and doesn't want to wound. Those are different silences. I drove down the following Thursday. The November air in Harnett County smells like wood smoke and pine resin. I pulled off Route 87 at dusk and sat in the car for a moment before I went in. The workshop was lit from inside. Through the small high window, I could see the blue-white glow of the fluorescent tubes my father had hung himself in 1994, replacing the yellowed fixtures that had been there when he bought the property. He was on the bucket outside the door when I found him, gray apron, grease on his hands, watching the tree line. I sat down on an old cable spool beside him. We watched the trees together for a few minutes. Marcus has a contact at a company called Meridian Industrial, he said finally. They buy shop properties, consolidate them, turn them into something else, warehouse space, distribution, whatever pays the square footage. He looked at his hands. He says they'd go to $1.4 million for the parcel, property and building, equipment excluded. I asked what that meant. Equipment excluded. Means they'd want the land and the structure, the machinery, the tooling, all the work I've built up that would be sold separately, auctioned most likely. He turned his hands over. 40 cents on the dollar for the lathes, less for the grinder. I thought about the surface grinder. He'd saved 4 years for it. He'd driven to Ohio to pick it up himself. What does the attorney say? I asked. He looked at me. His eyes were the same they'd always been, dark brown, very still, the eyes of a man who had spent decades making things that required absolute attention. Earl drew up a trust in April, he said. The shop property, the land, the building, the equipment list, it's all in the Raymond E. Whitmore Family Trust. I'm the trustee while I'm able. You're the successor trustee. I didn't speak. The word landed the way those words always land, not with noise, with weight. I told Earl what Marcus would do, my father said. He didn't disagree with me. He picked up a small bolt from the ground, turned it in his fingers, set it back down. Marcus doesn't know about the trust. Your mother doesn't know the full picture. I needed it done before anyone could talk me out of it. He paused. I'm not out of my mind, Claire, not yet. I wanted to decide this while deciding it was still mine to do. I put my hand over his. His knuckles were large. The joints enlarged the way they get after decades of real work. Did Marcus tell you when he wants to move on this? I asked. He's coming back, Thanksgiving weekend. My father looked at the workshop door. He's bringing someone from Meridian to look at the property. I nodded slowly. He doesn't know I already know what that means, my father said. He didn't say anything else. We sat there until the temperature dropped and the first star appeared over the tree line, and then I helped him up and we went inside for dinner. Let me tell you who Marcus is. Not the version he sells, the version I grew up beside. Marcus Whitmore is 34. He is 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, quick to laugh, and genuinely good at first impressions. He went to NC State on partial scholarship, changed his major 3 times, graduated with a degree in business administration, and spent the next decade moving between jobs that sounded impressive on paper: sales management, regional development, commercial real estate consulting. He earned good money in stretches. He lost it in others. He drove nice trucks and lived in apartments that cost more than they should have. He was never cruel to my father. That's the thing I want to say clearly, because this kind of story sometimes makes the family member into a cartoon. Marcus wasn't cruel. He was something harder to name. He was affectionate in a transactional way, generous when things were going well, absent when they weren't, and reliably present at the moments when there was something to be gained. He had called my father the old man since he was about 22. Not meanly, fondly even, but it was the kind of fond that kept a distance built into it. He arrived Thanksgiving weekend in the silver truck. He brought a man named Derek Poole, who wore a fleece vest with a Meridian Industrial logo on the chest and carried a clipboard with a printed property assessment sheet clipped to it. I was already there. I'd come Wednesday afternoon. My mother had made turkey the way she always did: sweet potato casserole, cranberry relish from the jar because my father preferred it to homemade, and she had long since stopped pretending otherwise. The table was set for 5: my parents, Marcus, Derek Poole, and me. Marcus hadn't expected me to be there. When he came through the door and saw my car in the driveway, something crossed his face, a half-second recalculation, and then he smiled his good smile and said, "Hey, Claire Bear, didn't know you were coming." I've been Claire Bear since I was 4. He still uses it when he wants to make me feel small. "Wouldn't miss Thanksgiving," I said. Derek Poole was polite, professional, and clearly uncomfortable eating turkey in someone's family home before making an offer on their property. He complimented the casserole twice. He asked my father about the lathe in the workshop, which he'd glimpsed through the window as they walked in. My father told him more about the lathe than Derek Poole had asked for or wanted. I watched my father's face while he talked. It was the face he used when he was very far from ready to let something go. After dinner, Marcus asked if he and Derek could walk the property. My father said, of course. He said it the same way he'd said he'd think about it to my mother, quietly, buying time. I washed the dishes. Sandra dried. When the men went out to the workshop, my mother set down her towel and looked at me. "He's already decided, hasn't he?" she said. It wasn't a question. "Dad has," I said. "Yes." She nodded once. She picked up the towel again. There was no more to say about it. I called Earl Totham the following Monday morning. His office was a 2-room suite above a tax preparation firm on Broad Street. Wood-paneled walls, diplomas from Campbell University Law School, a leather desk pad worn pale at the corners. Earl himself was 67, gray-haired, the kind of attorney who returned your calls before lunch, because he had been in practice long enough to know that delayed information was its own kind of malpractice. He knew I was coming. My father had called ahead. "The trust is clean," he said before I'd taken off my coat. "Recorded with the Harnett County Register of Deeds on April 14th. The property transferred into the trust the same day. Your father's name is on it as grantor and current trustee. Your name is on it as successor trustee." He slid a manila envelope across the desk. "Everything you need is in there. Title, the trust instrument, the property description, the equipment schedule." I opened the envelope. Inside, the trust document was 41 pages. My father's name at the top. My name on page 2, line 7. Successor trustee, Claire Ann Whitmore. "Marcus is working with a buyer," I said. "I know, your father told me." Earl leaned back in his chair. "Here's what Marcus doesn't understand. The property hasn't been in your father's personal name since April. It belongs to the trust. Marcus cannot list it, contract it, encumber it, or sell it. He has no legal authority over trust assets. Neither does your mother, for that matter, unless she's named a trustee, which she isn't." I read the line again. Successor trustee, Claire Ann Whitmore. What about a power of attorney? If they got Dad to sign one giving Marcus authority over financial decisions. Earl looked at me over his reading glasses, the look of a man who has seen this before. A personal power of attorney doesn't reach into a trust. Once property is transferred into the trust, even a durable POA held by a family member can't authorize its sale. The only person who can authorize any transaction involving trust assets is the trustee. He paused. Or the successor trustee, if the trustee is incapacitated. He's not incapacitated. No, but the Parkinson's is documented. His neurologist has already provided an evaluation letter. Your father requested it at the time of signing, same as any careful estate attorney would recommend. It confirms he had full legal capacity on April 14th and understood exactly what he was executing. Earl tapped the envelope. The foundation is solid. I thought about Derek Poole's clipboard, the printed assessment sheet, Meridian Industrial's logo on his vest. Marcus brought the buyer to walk the property Thanksgiving weekend, I said. He told my father he had an interested party. He didn't say the number. What did your father say? He said he'd think about it. Earl smiled, small, careful. Your father has been saying that for 8 months, every time Marcus brings it up. Meanwhile, the trust has been recorded for the same 8 months. He folded his hands on the desk. Your brother has been making plans for a property he hasn't owned since April. I let that sit for a moment. He doesn't know, I said. He doesn't know. I put the trust document back in the envelope. I held the envelope in my lap. Through the window above Earl's desk, I could see the street below, a normal Monday in a small town, traffic moving slow. A woman pushing a stroller past the hardware store my father had been buying supplies from for 30 years. What's my next step? I asked. Wait, Earl said, and don't say anything to Marcus, not yet. He paused. He'll move when he thinks he has something to move on. Let him. Marcus moved in December. He called my father on a Tuesday evening. My mother told me about the call the next morning. Marcus said Meridian had formalized their offer, $1.38 million for the property and structure, with a 45-day close. He said it was a strong number. He said the market wouldn't hold. He said he'd already spoken to a commercial real estate attorney in Fayetteville about handling the paperwork. His own attorney, for a property he didn't own. He asked my father to sign a seller's authorization form, a document that would formally designate Marcus as the seller's representative, allowing him to move forward with the transaction on my father's behalf. My father said he'd look it over. He called me as soon as Marcus hung up. He's moving fast now, he said. His voice was steady. He'd always been steadier than the situation required. He sent the authorization form by email. He wants it back by Friday. I asked if he'd signed anything. No, I printed it. It's on the workbench. Don't sign it, Dad. A pause. I know, Claire. Another pause. I've known for 8 months. I drove down Thursday. I picked up the authorization form from the workbench. I photographed every page. I sent the photos to Earl. He confirmed what I already knew. Even if my father signed the authorization, Marcus still had no power to transfer trust property. The authorization would be legally meaningless, but it would give Marcus the confidence to proceed, to represent to Meridian that he had authority to schedule a closing, to set a date. And a closing date was what I needed. Not for a fight, for a correction. Earl used that word, correction. He said it the way a careful man says any important thing, precisely, without drama, meaning exactly what it said. We let the closing proceed, Earl said. We let Marcus schedule it, we let Meridian show up, and at the table. We present the trust documents. The title officer will do the work for us. They cannot close on a property with a disputed title. No competent title officer in the state will record a deed they know to be defective. I thought about that word, defective, the opposite of everything my father had built his life on. He'll be humiliated, I said. Yes, Earl was quiet for a moment, but the alternative is letting him succeed, and then the humiliation is your father's, and the workshop is gone. I sat with that. Outside Earl's window, the same street as before, same hardware store, same slow traffic. There's one more thing, Earl said. Your father's capacity evaluation. Given the Parkinson's progression, we should have a current evaluation on file, something dated within the last 60 days, confirming that he remains the active trustee and that all prior trust documents were executed with full legal understanding. It closes the door on any argument that the trust was created when he was already compromised. I called the neurologist's office Friday morning. His name was Dr. Patrick Lund, out of the neurology practice in Raleigh. He'd been treating my father since the diagnosis. His office scheduled an evaluation for the following Tuesday. I drove my father to that appointment. We left at 6:45 in the morning. He brought his small spiral notebook. On the drive, he asked me about work. I asked him about the grinder, whether he'd run any jobs on it lately. He told me about a local farm equipment dealer who needed a custom shaft made, something that had to be machined to thousandths of an inch. He'd done it in 2 days. His hands shook slightly on his coffee cup. His mind was entirely clear. Dr. Lund's evaluation took 90 minutes. At the end, he sat across from my father and me and said that Raymond Whitmore demonstrated intact executive function, full orientation to person, place, and time, and clear understanding of the legal and financial instruments we'd asked him to discuss. He signed his name to the letter with a black pen, sealed it in an envelope, and handed it to me. "Keep that somewhere safe," he said. I kept it in the manila envelope with the trust documents. In the bottom drawer of my desk at the rental house, I kept in Raleigh, the same desk where I'd been doing my father's lease reviews for years. Marcus scheduled the closing for December 19th. He sent my father a confirmation email. Subject line: "Good news on the sale closing set." The email included the address of a title company in Fayetteville, a time of 2:00 p.m., and a list of documents he needed my father to bring. He wrote that he was proud of the number they'd gotten. $1.38 million was above the initial estimate, and that this was going to set Dad and Mom up right. My father forwarded the email to me without comment. I called Earl. "December 19th, I said. "I'll clear my afternoon," he said. I spent the 2 weeks before the closing the way I spend the 2 weeks before any significant proceeding. Quietly, methodically, and without announcing my intentions to anyone who wasn't already in the room with me. I called Meridian Industrial's corporate office and verified the name of the closing representative, a man named James Cooley, Director of Acquisitions. Professional, fast-moving, the kind of buyer who did 6 transactions like this a year. He would have a title attorney with him. He would expect a clean transaction. He was going to get an education instead. I confirmed with the Harnett County Register of Deeds that the trust deed was still on record. Still stamped, indexed, and recorded since April 14th. Public record, unchanged. I verified that no reconveyance deed had been filed, no document returning the property to my father's personal name, which would be required if the trust had ever been dissolved. It hadn't been. The trust was intact. I contacted the title company, a firm called Cornerstone Title Services on Ramsey Street. The closing officer was a woman named Beverly Marsh, 15 years in the business. Earl knew her by reputation. Thorough, by the book, the kind of title officer who understood that a bad recording was a liability that attached to her personally. Earl made one informal call, not to tip our hand, just to confirm that Beverly's preliminary title search had returned the trust deed. She had flagged it 3 weeks earlier when she first ran the search and had sent an inquiry to Marcus. Marcus had sent back an email saying the trust was outdated and had been dissolved before the listing agreement was signed. He offered no documentation, no recorded reconveyance, just an email. Beverly had accepted it provisionally. She'd noted in the file that no reconveyance deed appeared in the public record, but had scheduled the closing as tentative, pending final title clearance. The deal was already unstable. It just needed someone to show up with the original. December 19th was cold. That particular cold that comes off the North Carolina Piedmont in mid-December, damp and low, the kind that gets into your coat no matter how good the coat is. I drove to Fayetteville alone. Earl was meeting me at Cornerstone Title Services. He parked on the street at 138. I pulled in beside him at 142. He was wearing his good gray suit, the one he wore to closings and courtrooms. He carried a leather briefcase. I carried my father's manila envelope. We walked in together. Cornerstone Title Services occupied a 2-story brick building with a glass front lobby and a reception desk staffed by a woman who looked up when we entered and said she'd let Beverly know we were here. Earl gave his name and the name of the trust. The receptionist's fingers paused on her keyboard for just a moment. That pause meant she recognized the name from Beverly's file. Beverly Marsh met us in the hallway outside conference room. She was in her 50s. Dark hair shot through with gray, reading glasses on a cord around her neck. She looked at Earl, then at the envelope in my hand. "Mr. Totham," she said, "I didn't see your firm listed on the transaction documents." "We represent the Raymond E. Whitmore Family Trust," Earl said. "We have documents relevant to this closing." Beverly looked at the envelope one more time. "Come in," she said. We went in. Conference room A had a long table, 8 chairs, a water pitcher, and a wall of windows looking onto the parking lot. Beverly sat up at the head of the table. Earl and I took seats on the left side. The trust envelope sat on the table in front of me. They arrived at 1:58. Marcus came in first. He was wearing a blazer over a collared shirt, dressed for a transaction. He had his phone out, scrolling, the posture of a man who expected this to take 45 minutes. Behind him came Derek Poole from Meridian, same fleece vest as Thanksgiving. Behind Derek came James Cooley, the acquisitions director, navy suit, briefcase, the specific unhurried confidence of someone who closes deals for a living. Behind them, Marcus's Fayetteville attorney, a man named Gary Tripp, who I recognized from the firm's website where I'd looked him up 2 weeks prior. Marcus saw me and stopped. Not a long stop. A half-second recalculation, the same one I'd seen in my parents' doorway at Thanksgiving. Then his expression settled into something that wasn't quite his good smile, something adjacent to it. "Claire," he said it evenly, "didn't know you were going to be here." "Taking a seat," I said. Earl introduced himself to Beverly. He introduced himself to Gary Tripp, who I could see doing his own rapid assessment of the room. Gary was a commercial real estate attorney. He knew what it meant when someone from a trust attorney's office appeared at a closing for the first time. Marcus said, "She's my sister. She doesn't have standing here." Earl said, "She's the successor trustee of the Raymond E. Whitmore Family Trust. She has standing." Beverly looked at Earl. "You said you have documents." Earl opened his briefcase. He placed 3 items on the table, one at a time, centered, squared. The first was a certified copy of the trust deed, recorded with the Harnett County Register of Deeds on April 14th of this year. Stamped, indexed. The property transferred from Raymond E. Whitmore, individual, to the Raymond E. Whitmore Family Trust. My name on the second page as successor trustee. The second was a certified copy of the trust instrument, the full 41 pages, with the successor trustee designation highlighted and tabbed. The third was Dr. Patrick Lund's evaluation letter. Raymond E. Whitmore, evaluated December 3rd of this year. Full executive function, full orientation, full legal capacity at time of trust execution, April 14th, confirmed by prior evaluation and consistent with current assessment. Beverly picked up the trust deed. She read the first page. She compared it to the title report in her own file. She read it a second time. She set it down. She looked at Marcus. "Mr. Whitmore, you represented to this office that the trust had been dissolved prior to the listing agreement." Marcus's jaw was set. "It was dissolved. My father intended to dissolve it, he told me." "Intention doesn't dissolve a trust," Earl said. "Only a recorded instrument does. No reconveyance deed exists in the public record. The property has been in this trust since April. This sale cannot close." Marcus turned to Gary Tripp. Something passed between them, the specific look of a client and attorney who have both just realized they are in a room full of facts they cannot overwrite. Gary cleared his throat. "There may be grounds to." "There aren't," Earl said, not unkindly, simply. "A trust established with full legal capacity, executed and recorded 14 months before this closing, is not subject to a family dispute at a title table. If you want to contest the trust instrument, that's a probate proceeding. It's not this transaction. Beverly Marsh set down the trust deed. She squared her shoulders. She looked at James coolly. "Mr. Cooley," she said, "I cannot clear this title." James Cooley's face did not change much. He was a man who had been in rooms like this before, not this exact room, but rooms like it. He closed his portfolio. He looked at Marcus. "You represented clean title," he said. His voice was quiet and very level. "We have a contract contingent on clean title." Marcus said, "This is a family misunderstanding. My sister is." "Your sister is the successor trustee of a recorded trust that holds this property," Earl said. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's a recorded document." The room went very still. Beverly said, "I'll be documenting this closing as void and flagging the file. There are title issues that were misrepresented in the preliminary affidavit. I'll be noting that in my report." James coolly stood. He nodded to Beverly. He did not look at Marcus again. He and Derek Poole gathered their papers and walked out. I heard their footsteps in the hallway, steady and fast, the footsteps of men who had somewhere more reliable to be. Gary Tripp said something quiet to Marcus. I couldn't hear it. Marcus was looking at the trust deed on the table. He was looking at the page with his father's signature on it, and with my name on the line below it, and his name on no line at all. He looked up at me. His good smile was gone. What was there instead was something rawer, something I recognized because I'd seen it in him as a boy, the specific anguish of someone who had been very certain and was now being shown exactly how certain he had been wrong. "He did this without telling me," Marcus said. "Not to me, to the room, to no one." "He did it in April," I said. "He did it while he still could." Marcus looked at the window, the parking lot outside, James Cooley's vehicle already pulling out. "You knew," he said. "The whole time, Thanksgiving, the phone calls, you knew." "I knew what he asked me to know," I said, "and I did what he asked me to do." Gary Tripp touched Marcus's arm. They left. The door closed. Beverly Marsh was still writing in her file. She wrote for a moment without speaking. Then she looked at Earl and said, "I want you to know I had a flag on this title for 3 weeks. The affidavit Mr. Whitmore submitted was not consistent with the recorded documents." "I know," Earl said. "That'll be part of the record." Beverly nodded. She slid a business card across to Earl. "If there's anything the trust needs from this office, the file is preserved." We walked out into the December cold at 2:47. Earl stood on the sidewalk and put on his hat. I stood beside him with the envelope in my hands. The sky over Fayetteville was the color of old tin. A stoplight 2 blocks away changed from red to green. "Your father did good work," Earl said. "He always did," I said. I drove back to Harnett County that evening. My father was in the workshop when I pulled in. The fluorescent tubes threw their blue-white light through the high window. I went in through the side door. He was at the workbench, his own father's workbench, the heart pine one, running his hand along a piece of stock he was checking for flatness. He did it by feel. He'd been doing it by feel for 30 years. He looked up when I came in. He didn't ask how it went. He read my face. "Closing's void," I said. Beverly Marsh flagged the file. Meridian walked out. Marcus's attorney didn't contest it. My father set the stock down. He didn't say anything for a moment. He wiped his hands on his apron, not because they were dirty, but because that's what he did when he needed a moment to let something land. He'd been wiping his hands on that apron since before I could remember. "Meridian will go find something else to buy," I said. "They're not your problem anymore." "Marcus," he said. "He's not your problem either. Not right now. He'll call. You can decide what you want to say." My father looked at the lathe across the room. The surface grinder against the far wall, the workbench beneath his hands. "I was afraid," he said, "that I'd waited too long, that by the time I decided, the deciding would already be done for me." "You went to Earl in April," I said. "That was the right time." He nodded once, slow. "I wanted you to have something real," he said. "Not at me, at the room, at the walls he'd built up over 35 years of precision work. Not a promise, something recorded." I put my hand on the workbench beside his. The heart pine was warm from the shop lights, worn smooth in the places where generations of hands had rested. "It's recorded," I said, "the whole thing." He breathed out. Not relief, exactly. Something older than relief. The particular settling of a man who has been braced for a long time and can finally let the brace go. We stood in the workshop for a while after that. He told me about the farm equipment job again, the custom shaft, the measurements, the way he'd had to adjust his grip on the micrometer because of the tremor in his right hand, and how he'd compensated, and how the measurement had still come out right. He told it the way he always told work stories, with complete specificity, with no wasted words, with the quiet pride of a person who knows the difference between something done well and something done badly, and who has always, without exception, chosen the first. Here is what happened after. Marcus called my father 11 days later. It was a Sunday. My mother told me about it. She said Marcus had cried on the phone. She said my father had listened without saying much. She said my father had told him at the end that he was welcome to come for Christmas if he wanted to. Marcus came for Christmas. He didn't say anything to me about the trust. He didn't say anything to me about the closing. He helped my father carry wood in from the stack behind the house, and he sat at the dinner table, and he was quieter than I'd ever seen him. At one point during dessert, he looked at my father's hands around his coffee cup. The shaking, the careful steadiness, and his face did something. I don't have a precise name for what it did. It was the face of someone who has been calculating the wrong value for something important and has just now arrived at the correct number. He didn't say it out loud. He didn't need to. James Cooley's company sent a formal letter to Marcus's attorney in January. It outlined the losses Meridian claimed to have incurred in the period between signing the purchase agreement and the failed closing, due diligence costs, attorney fees, time. The letter requested resolution. Earl reviewed it. The number wasn't small. Marcus's situation was his own to resolve. I wasn't in it. In February, my father expanded the workshop's custom machining contract with a manufacturing firm in Durham. He hired a part-time machinist named Tommy Graves, a man in his 60s who'd been laid off from a larger shop and who knew how to operate a hardened lathe the way my father knew how to operate a hardened lathe. Precisely, quietly, and without being told twice. My father showed Tommy the surface grinder the first week. He explained where he'd bought it, how he'd driven to Ohio to pick it up, what he'd paid for it, what it could do. Tommy listened the way a person listens when they understand they're being told something that matters. I drove down in March and the three of them, my father, Tommy, and me, had lunch at the work table. My mother brought sandwiches from the kitchen. The fluorescent lights were on. The grinder hummed in the background. My father's hands shook slightly on his coffee cup. His voice was completely clear. He is still the trustee. I hope he is for a long time yet. But if the morning comes when the neurologist says the window is closing, when the spiral notebook runs out of room for what needs to be recorded, the trust is already in place. The name on the second page. The recording date. The ink on the deed that doesn't shake. He did it right. He did it in April. He did it while the deciding was still his to do. Some of the people reading this have a parent who is still well enough to make the call. Still sharp enough to sit across from an attorney and say, "Here is what I have. Here is who I trust. Here is what I need on paper before anyone else decides for me." If that's your situation, if you have been putting off that conversation because it feels too heavy, or too final, or too much like admitting that the window is not permanent, I want you to hear this. The window is not permanent. That is not a tragedy. That is the only fact that makes the preparation matter. A deed recorded in April means something. A name on the second page means something. A successor trustee who shows up at a closing table in December with 41 pages and a physician's letter, that means something too. It means someone did the work while the work was still theirs to do. That's my father. That's his workshop. That's the grinder against the far wall that he drove to Ohio to pick up and paid for in full and will never, not once, be auctioned for 40 cents on the dollar. That's the story. One cinder block building off Route 87. one manila envelope in a bottom drawer, and a man who knew the difference between something that has value and something that is valuable, and made sure the right one was on record. If this story reminded you to have the conversation, have it this week. Don't wait for a closing date. The filing office opens at 8 a.m., and a trust takes less time to record than you think. Drop a comment. Share this with someone who needs it. Subscribe to her silent triumph, and I'll see you in the next one.